Good morning. And welcome to Leadership Mastery Session 4, Active Listening. Now, if any of you have ever spent time with me before, you know the value of being a great active listener. It's one of the things that people want the most in their lives, and it's one of the things people say is always missing. So today we're going to take a deeper dive into active listening. And before we do that, let's talk a little bit about our roadmap. We've worked on creating awareness. We've worked on emotional intelligence. We've also got into different ways we could start implementing what we're learning into our business. One second. Sorry about that, guys. My face was covering up the slide. So these next few sessions in the second half of the program is really about how does all the things that we talked about show up in your business, show up in your life, and ultimately create that difference that you came here for. Today's roadmap, how to listen to create favorable outcomes. Are you guys aware by just listening better, you'll be able to create different outcomes, the outcomes that you want, the outcomes that the other people desire, why people want to be heard. You know, this is a really interesting topic, and most of the time when people start this conversation, it starts out with a joke. And if you really dive deeper into it, there are thoughts, feelings, and a lot of stuff under the iceberg that we're going to get into. And then we're going to talk about using the active listening mindset to get what you want. Did you ever think the difference between what you want and what you have is just listening? We're going to get more into that today.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. David Severance here. Delighted to be back with you again to continue the work we started already. As Chirag said, today's all about listening. If it's not something that you think about so much in your everyday life, I really strongly urge you to give it some focus, not just today, but as you go forward in leading your teams. I'd like to start by asking you a simple question. Who serves who in your business? If I were to ask you, why do you serve your clients? A very basic question. Why do you serve your clients? You might say something like, well, because that's how I make money. Fair enough. When you serve your clients' needs, you make money. So if I can restate the nature of the relationship there, what I hear is you enter into a relationship with someone else who has a need. And by listening to and responding to that need, you make money. Fair enough. But let me ask you, that's not the only way you make money, is it? You've created a parallel pathway for yourself to earn more money, and that is by hiring somebody to be on your team. Maybe an admin person, maybe an agent, and you're hiring them because they have some capabilities, some talent, some ability, some motivation, desire, or experience that you think can help you make more money. So you invite them into your business. But let me ask you, how about that particular relationship? Who serves who there? If your answer is, well, they serve me, I'm the boss. Yeah, sure, that's one way to think about it. But what if you turn that around the other way? What if you turn it around and make the relationship there fundamentally about serving their needs instead of their fundamentally serving yours? And the reason you might want to think that way, if that's not how you've currently or up to now conceived of your business, is you're bringing this person onto your team because of the talent they have, because of the ability they have, because of the knowledge or experience that they have. And it is to your business's benefit if they are able to express that ability that they have fully. You're bringing them on for that ability, but if there's anything that you're doing that's getting in the way of them expressing it, it may be actually hurting your business more than helping. So we'd like to start with that as a backdrop to think about how you think about your business, because ultimately when you make more money in your business through what you're getting out of this program, it's not just what you're going to do differently. And it's been great to hear from so many of you who are already implementing so much of what we're talking about here. Keep those stories coming. It's also a matter of how you're going to think differently about your business. So if the way you've been conceiving of your business is all about adding other staff serving you, turn that around in your mind for a little bit and think about how it might provide opportunity for your business if you made it all about serving them. There's a whole lot of reasons and benefits that you get about serving their needs and listening to them in those situations. You can make them feel seen, heard, and valued. That affects their motivation and willingness to be there. You can increase trust and rapport in your relationships with them, just as you want to do with your clients. We often say you'll do anything to serve your external clients. Are you doing the same to serve your internal ones, which are your staff? All right, let's move on to our first learning point for the day. We want to talk about different styles of listening. Most people think listening is just listening, but we want to think about the different ways that we can listen. And there's three of them that are primarily the ones that you might want to keep in mind when you're thinking about how you listen. We call them subjective listening, objective listening, and empathetic listening. Subjective listening is a kind of listening where you hear what the other person has to say, but then you immediately or soon thereafter kind of turn it around and hear it through the filter of your own particular interests or preference or need. So for example, you might go to one of your staff and you say, hey, I got something that I really want you to do for me. And the other person says, oh yeah, sure, got it. Boy, I'm hungry. What am I going to do for lunch today? We've got an hour left before we can eat. In this subjective listening example, what's happened there is that the listener has actually taken the initial conversation from the speaker and they've turned it around to their particular interest, which is, my stomach is empty, I'm hungry. In a sense, this person has actually hijacked the communication. And it's something that we do all the time without thinking about it. And it can really be destructive in terms of the relationships that we're having with people. That's subjective listening. Objective listening. Objective listening is a very different kind of listening. This is the kind of listening that we probably do 80% of the time in the business world. That is, you're hearing what the other person is saying. You're hearing it not through the filter of your own particular experience or interest. You're simply hearing it as it's delivered from the other person. In other words, you're in their agenda. You're in their particular interests. And for that reason, it's completely different from subjective listening. So in this particular case, if you say to somebody, hey, listen, I really want to talk with you about something today. And the person says, yeah, got it. Let's schedule some time at 11 and 11:30 to do that. That might be good enough for your particular needs at that point, and it's totally different from what we call subjective listening. Third, empathetic listening. This is really the most important one that we need to think about. The empathetic listening opportunities don't come along all the time, and we don't need to apply our best listening to everything that comes to us. But we do need to make sure that the empathetic listening opportunities don't go over our heads. An empathetic listening opportunity is one where you hear not only the words that are spoken, but you're hearing what's underneath the iceberg or what's behind the words. You get some kind of insight into what's prompting that particular communication. If a person comes to you because they have a particular need, it may not be stated outright, this is what I need from you. But if you're listening between the lines, if you're listening with an empathetic mindset, then maybe you get some insight actually prompting the communication. And in that particular case, if you can clue into what's prompting the communication, then you can have an extremely powerful impact on the person around you, whether it's a client, whether it's admin or someone that works for you, or someone else in your life. So if you say to someone, for example, hey, listen, I really need to talk with you today. And the person says, wow, sounds pretty important. Let me put down what I'm working on right now to help you with it. What's going on? You can imagine if you got that kind of a response from somebody, how wonderful it would feel to know that that person is not just hearing what you're saying, but they're hearing the importance to you of what's being said. And so the empathetic listening opportunities are the ones that are the most valuable ones, whether it's a client, whether it's a staff member, whether it's someone else in your life. And you want to make sure that you're not letting those particular instances go right by. Now, one thing we want to say about listening is we want to make sure that when we're thinking about listening, we're thinking about this kind of like concept of who has the need in that particular moment. When two people are in a relationship, sometimes person A has a particular need. Sometimes person B has a particular need. When it's person A who has a need and then you're the listener, you need to recognize that they have a need first, and that's why they've come to you. And then you need to try to understand what the nature of the need is. We'll talk more about that in just a couple of minutes, but we want to kind of work with this concept of who has the need. Obviously, when you have a need, you're compelled to go start a communication with the other person, whether it's in person or email or whatever it is. But we're talking today about listening. When the other person comes to you and they have a particular need, that's the whole point here. And what we want to say most importantly in all of this is, when the other person has a need, you need to be in listening mode. And that means you need to make the whole communication about them and their need. If you make the communication about your need, then you're no longer listening. You're in your own agenda. You're in your own interests or preferences. And this is the problem with subjective listening. As soon as you make the communication or the interaction about your need, you're no longer listening. So jot down a note to yourself. 100% pure listening means it's not about me or my need. If I'm in listening mode, it's got to be about the other person's need. All right, so let's work with those three terms right now for just a minute: subjective, objective, and empathetic listening. And let's put it in terms of what's really happening in people's business. Chirag?
Dave, this is really interesting. And when you talk about who has the need, here's a need that every person on this call will be able to relate to, and their team members will be able to relate to. When somebody comes to your open house, who has the need? Very often, I talk to agents about the conversations they have, and they always want to know a few different things. A, how do I build rapport? B, how do I get people to work with me? C, when the people come to an open house, how do they choose me? And what I find in many of these conversations, David, is that they have subjective listening. They're just listening to be able to tell them what they want to tell them, right? And really, the key in converting clients is being a great active listener, using that empathetic listening that David was talking about, really understanding somebody's needs and being able to meet them there. So let's talk about an actual scenario as well. Your buyer's agent is frustrated because she thinks she's not getting enough business from the team. Sound familiar? You're frustrated and mad that your buyer's agent isn't converting as many leads as you hoped. You think she's wasting your money and creating animosity within the team. The buyer's agent decides to confront you about not having enough opportunity and accuses you of taking all the good leads, leaving her with the bad leads that are impossible to convert. So David, you know, we shared this scenario last time. This is one of the most common ones we hear from agents. So we're going to go back to our three-step approach, right? How do you think about it? How should you approach the conversation? And ultimately what you should say. When you're listening to this and you're a team leader, what should they be thinking about?
Two things. You need to be thinking about what's coming up for you, and you need to be aware of what's coming up, or what's kind of the kind of crux of this whole thing for the other person. Recognize that they've come to you because something here is important to them. They would never have raised this issue unless it really mattered to them. In other words, there's a strong motivation for them to kind of rectify this situation as they see it. But if they propose it to you or kind of share it with you in a way that seems a little bit confrontational, or at least you take it that way, like you get a little defensive, then suddenly you're right back into your own agenda again. It's like, this person doesn't, respect me. He or she is like blaming me for his or her mistakes or weaknesses or failures or something like that. And it's natural that this stuff will come up in you from your own mindset. And this is where the danger of subjective listening lies. If we're going to be in our own subjective interpretation of what we're hearing from the other person, immediately we're no longer listening. And so the think part is really all about us recognizing what's coming up for us in that moment, but not necessarily letting that stuff guide how we respond to the situation. Instead, we want to make sure that we're trying to stay in the particular need that the other person has and act from there. So our approach is stay away from our own interpretation of it and make sure that we're finding a way to stay in the story that the other person has brought to us, whether or not it makes sense to us or not, whether or not their perception of the situation is identical to ours. Probably it isn't. It's up to us to understand that we need to make the conversation about their interpretation of the situation and work from there completely through. If there's another time that you want to have a conversation about how they perceive things and how you perceive things, that's perfectly fine. But for that particular moment, when we're in listening mode, when we're there to serve their need, we need to stay there and be with them and understand it from their perspective rather than kind of falling into the trap of making it about us. So how can you respond in a situation like this? Well, you might typically say something like, well, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but we've all got to kind of find a way to work through this. And I try to make it fair to everybody. And, I'm trying to do the best I can. Well, that kind of a logical explanation may have some kind of logic behind it. Yes, you're trying to be fair to everybody. Yes, you want to run a fair business for everybody. But is that the reason the person came to you for you to explain how fairly you kind of give out the leads to everybody? Probably not. They're coming to you from a place of frustration and anger because as they see it, you're not being fair. From their point of view, in their world, it doesn't look fair to them. So for you to simply restate that you are doing things fairly doesn't really hold any water from their perspective. Instead, you might say something like, I can understand what you're saying here, and I really want to understand better how things look to you. I'd like to understand, what's the challenge here for you, or maybe you have some suggestions about how we can do things better and how they would work for you. Let's go into this a little bit further and see how we can work on it together and solve this in a way that works for all of us. That particular response might come off much more positively to the other person than simply saying, hey, I try my best to give it out equally to everybody. Chirag?
David, and what to add on to what you're saying is, and our good old iceberg is, look, underneath that is a thought, a feeling, and ultimately an insecurity that I'm not going to make enough money, right? And when the agents have processed this, and I'll speak to team leaders and I'll speak with their agents, this is what I always hear. I'm afraid, right? There's a fear behind that statement. Wouldn't you agree, David?
Yes. So here's a clue for everybody. When you find either person in a conversation falling into subjective listening mode, chances are there's a fearful thought in there. There's a fearful interpretation of what's going on. If X doesn't happen, Y is going to happen, and that's bad. Or if X does happen, then Y is going to happen, and that's bad. As soon as somebody is in this kind of fearful interpretation of the situation, it's very easy for them to want to make it all about themselves because they perceive risk there. And in a sense, the other person's already coming to you because they see some kind of a fearful situation, like they're not getting what they think they deserve, or they think that maybe perhaps on purpose you're giving them what they don't deserve, or maybe you're not supporting them enough. Whatever it is, there is a fearful piece of that that's motivating them to start the conversation. And it may bring up some kind of a fearful thing in you too. And so as a leader and a listener, we want to make sure that we're not allowing the fearful emotion to dictate our response.
And most people, if you think about it logically, guys, is it easier to blame somebody else or look in the mirror? Most people tend to blame. So when they come to you, just understand where they're coming from, right? Understand that part of coming to your team, if you ask them what were their expectations in coming in the beginning, most of the people that are getting out leads like this, that was part of coming here. So they thought they're going to make money. So in their mind, their expectation wasn't fulfilled. So that's behind their iceberg when they're coming here. And you ask them questions too. A great question is, what specifically do you think you need that I can support you with to be successful in converting more online leads, right? And if you use the word specifically, it'll help people isolate their thought, their feeling, and what they want and how you could help them. So let's go into an inspired change. And I'll have everyone use the chat box for this. What type of listener are you? Are you subjective? Are you objective? Or are you an empathetic listener? I'll give everyone a moment to share. A blend of all three at different times. Objective.
Yeah, somebody just had a good comment in there. Sometimes I find myself preparing my response while the other person's still talking. It's a very common thing. And guess what? That's getting subjective, right? Very often what another person says to us prompts something in us like, oh my gosh, I better respond this way, or I need to kind of refute that. And unfortunately, we've jumped out of listening mode at that particular moment. And now we're in what we call assertion mode, which is I need to kind of impose my agenda or my preference or my interest in the situation. And we all do it. It's something that we don't want to do very often because it has a powerful shutdown effect on the other.
So what I want you guys to do in your workbook now is list 3 situations to become aware of where you can be a better listener using objective and empathetic listening. Start thinking about where this shows up in your business. What have your team members said to you? What have your clients said to you? And ultimately too, like, what happens in your life, right? This isn't just about business. Someone asked, I was talking with Felicia Lewis, who's going to be our live coaching agent today. And I said to her, success in coaching is measured by 2 things. And if you don't have both, I don't think the coaching is successful. It's having a growth in your business and your business getting better, but ultimately your life getting better. All these skills you have that we're talking about are leading your team differently, being a better leader, but ultimately help you lead a better life. Think about how different your relationships would be with people if you're always empathetically listening. Think of all those times that you subjectively listened and how that made someone else feel. Or when someone comes to you and asks you a question, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But hey, do you think you want to get lunch in an hour? Think about what that actually feels like. And the more aware you become of this, right? This goes back to our last session about emotional intelligence. So this is where we talk about putting all these things together, right? Having clear roles and responsibilities, how to use emotional intelligence to understand people's thoughts, feelings, the iceberg, and now how to use listening. If you start putting all this stuff together, it's going to become very clear on how you can connect with your team, build that culture of inclusion, and get them to be more productive, profitable, and efficient.
Here's a quick guideline for everybody about how you might want to balance your subjective, objective, and empathetic listening. Subjective listening should never be more than 10% of how you listen. Because if it is, you're cutting people off, you're making them feel not heard, you're showing them that what matters more to you is your interests than their interests. And that's not good for anyone's relationship, of course. Objective listening is where you need to be, probably like, let's call it 70% of the time. Everyday communication, make it clear, make it concise, repeat it back if necessary from time to time. That's like the large amount of business communication. But 10 to 20% of it, that is the empathetic listening opportunity. That's the case where there's an emotional element behind it or some kind of high value element to the communication from the other person's point of view. And you don't want to let those go over your head. You don't want to let them pass you by. So you don't need to be in empathetic listening mode all the time with everyone, but you want to make sure that you're kind of scanning the situation for when it's there. So aim for like 10% subjective or less, of course, is even better. 70% or so for objective, and about 20% or so for empathetic. You may find that with some people in your business or some people in your life, you're always in subjective mode while others you're in objective mode. Or you might find that in some people in your life or even some situations in your life, you're much more easily in empathetic listening mode and others you're not at all. So as you examine your own listening habits, try to bring a little more discernment into when you're in subjective mode versus the others. And is there some kind of pattern there that you'd like to shift?
So before we get into this, how many people are smiling? Why do people want to be heard, right? If you're married, you really know the value of hearing your partner when they're coming to speak with you about something. And, before we kick it back to David to talk more in depth about this, the one thing I want to share with everyone to be mindful of, just because someone is sharing something with you does not mean that they always want a response or a solution. There is a significant value in listening and people just being heard, right, David?
Absolutely. One of the things that we're going to emphasize to everybody is whenever you find yourself in a listening situation, which is recognizing that the other person has a need, first thing you need to try to do is understand the nature of the need. What is this person coming to me for right now? Sometimes they might be coming for information. Sometimes they might be coming for a decision. Sometimes they might be coming for an answer. Sometimes they might be coming for a solution. There's a whole host of different things that they might come to you for. And here's the kicker of it. If someone comes to you for something and you give them something else, you're not listening. And what's worse, you're giving them an experience of being not heard. In other words, for example, let's say someone comes to you and they want to vent. They're talking about their team. They're saying, oh, my admin does this, and my agent does that, and my legal person is doing this to me. It's screwing me over. And you say, let me tell you what you ought to do about that. What you've offered is a solution. But based on what I just said, were they coming to you for a solution? Probably not. Maybe they were coming just to you to vent. And if someone comes to you to vent, they want to be heard. But if you're not hearing them, if you're giving them a solution when they want to vent, you're not listening. And we do this all the time. It may come out of a nice desire that we have to be compassionate and supportive of our friends or our business colleagues, certainly. But if a business owner comes to you and says, I've got all these problems in my business, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're looking for your solution to how to solve them. They may recognize that you don't know how to run their business. You got your own business, they got theirs. Or maybe they already have a solution that they're going to implement starting tomorrow. But by imposing your solution, you've actually given something that they may not have asked for. And this is really important, not just in your business, but in your personal life. For example, how about this question? Did you ever get this question from your spouse or your significant others? Let's say you're sitting in your bedroom, you're reading a book or whatever it is, and your spouse says to you, or your significant other says to you, does this outfit make me look fat? Now you can answer that simply with a yes or no. And it could be that your spouse or your significant other is asking for your opinion on whether that makes them look this way or that way. But perhaps actually what's motivating that conversation or that question is that person might be doubting whether he or she is attractive as much as he or she used to be, or is still, loved by you, something like that. It could be a completely different thing that's motivating that question. And so if you misunderstand what the nature of the need is, and you simply say, yeah, that makes you look fat, or no, it doesn't make you look fat, and you go back to your book, what they're going to have is an experience of not being heard. And so it's crucial for you to think of all the different things that people might come to you for. You can see them listed on the workbook in session on page 9. And there's even more besides that. But sometimes what they need from you is one particular thing. And whenever you give them something else, you're not listening and they're getting an experience of not being heard. So think of those things as you go forward. Maybe post, page 9 somewhere on your wall or something for a couple of weeks. And just use it as a little tool to think about when someone brings something to you. What is the nature of the need?
David, this is really a good scenario to talk about. There was an agent who yesterday reached out to me and said, my client is micromanaging the whole process. They want to change the pictures. They want to change the video. They want to do all these different things. And it's really frustrated. And then her response was, well, I just want to tell them. And I said, wait a second, think about the iceberg, think about their thoughts, their feelings, and and actively and empathetically listening to them. What is really their need behind that? Because again, there's probably a fear, a thought, and a feeling, correct?
Absolutely. This is where we use the phrase, you might jot this one down. What's true for you is true for you. Chirag's heard me say that 100 times. As a listener and as a leader, we need to allow other people to have their interpretation of the situation. And as soon as someone brings a situation to us and we immediately reject their particular view of the thing and want to just kind of impose how we see things, we're not allowing them to see the world and be in the world as they are. We're simply imposing on them how they ought to see the world based on what we think about it. And that's a pretty powerful thing to say to somebody, that you're not allowed to have your own opinion. So in kind of like your listening mindset, a piece of this is allow the other person to be true whatever is true for them and work with that.
That's a very good point. This is definitely a pearl of wisdom there. So look, in listening, by acknowledging somebody's thoughts, feelings, desires, and let them know that their concern is actually heard, will ultimately change the way that the conversation is had. For us in real estate, people are telling us things constantly over a period of time, and then something happens and they say, well, I don't want to work with you anymore. And you're shocked. You're like, I've done all this work and everything else. And if you dig in deeper, there are a lot of things that the client has said to you throughout the process that you really weren't listening to. And you're using subjective listening to just provide an answer when you really needed to acknowledge a need. So when we talk about being heard, let's talk about an inspired change. What opportunities in your business do you have to create a better culture of productivity through connecting with your team and allowing them to be heard? An interesting scenario is if you as a team leader assign something to your team member and then go and do it before them, and they're like frustrated, and they come to you and it's like, why don't you trust me? And, this, depending on the way you listen, the way you respond, and the way that you think about what they're saying, you could have a very potential combative response, right? And really all they're looking for is your acknowledgement and that you trust them to do a job. And if you look at on the flip side of your communication, did you really communicate with that other person a clear and concise time deadline on when you want the task done? In many of the cases, the answer is no. So now you haven't communicated clearly, you've created a bad experience for somebody, and then they come to you with why they're being challenged and how they feel, and you're subjective and you're dismissive. Now think about how all these different scenarios build into a culture, right? How it builds into your culture with your team members, your buyer's agents, and your clients. So I want you to go back and I want you to look at a few different scenarios in your head, which are really opportunities. And I want you guys to put in the chat box, what are some opportunities you feel that you could have to create a scenario where somebody could be heard to create a better culture for your team and business? Open forum and team meetings. Anybody else? Empowering colleagues. Oh, here it comes. Hey, David, what are some opportunities that you'd share with them on ways that they can make their team members feel heard and the opportunities that they might be missing that are right in front of them?
Yeah, the first thing to do is look for any single moment where they are bringing something to you and recognize that there's something powerful enough in them that's compelling them to start that conversation, to initiate that conversation. It's not just, I've got a million people I need to talk with today or listen to today, and this is just one more out of a million. It's recognizing that every single one matters, especially the one from the people that are closest to you, and treat each one with special care and respect. It's like a doctor would need to treat every single patient with the kind of care and concern. Secondly, make your communications about questions, not statements. When you are listening, you're dealing in questions. When you're stating or asserting, you're dealing in statements. So we want to make sure that your conversation or your participation in the conversation is built around questions. They could be open-ended questions like, how does this look from your point of view? Or what do you think about that? Or what part of this is most challenging to you? These are the kinds of questions that start with what, when, why, how, who, where. Those kinds of questions are open-ended questions, and they can give you a very valuable insight into what the world looks like from your team members' perspective.
All right, guys, look, the opportunities are here. They're in front of us every day with every conversation we have with clients, team members, families, and friends. We want to make sure that you actually just stop and realize, and I'll use the chat box again, how many people see a new opportunity today to be a better listener, to create a better outcome, and ultimately realize by doing this, you're going to give the other person what they want, as well as you're going to get the outcome you want. I'd like to see through the chat box how many people had aha moments. Great.
You can really practice this with everybody in your life, but you can also practice it by just focusing on one or two people. If you're thinking, oh, well, gosh, how am I going to listen better? One way to do it is just pick one person in your life. It could be somebody in your business. It could be somebody else. And make sure that you're providing excellent listening to that particular person. Practice it there. And I wouldn't even recommend that you do it with like your spouse or your significant other if that's not your typical style, because they might start wondering, well, why are you suddenly listening to me? Is there some kind of ulterior motive behind this? I would pick somebody in your business or some client that you care about, that you want to have a good relationship with, and practice bringing this kind of active listening approach to what it is they're bringing to you. Now, there was one thing that Shirley said a minute ago that I just want to respond to. She was saying, if empathetic listening brings the best outcomes, why don't you do it more than 20 or 30% of the time? It's a great question. What we want to understand about empathetic listening is empathetic listening can be thought of as the highest stakes listening opportunities. That is, because it's a situation where there's an especially powerful emotion or stake that's prompting the communication to come to you in the first place, that's why the outcome can be the most powerful. But it's not happening all the time. As I said before, most communication is everyday stuff. So for example, if somebody asks you, hey, listen, could you just send me a copy of that contract when you have a moment? It's appropriate for you to say, got it, I'll send you a copy after we get off the call. It wouldn't be appropriate for you to say, please tell me more about why you're feeling that I should send you the contract. There might not be that kind of compelling emotional need or something else behind that everyday statement. So the empathetic listening opportunities are ones that come to us 10 or 20% of the time. they're the ones that are the most valuable to have and the ones that we want to respond to when we can, but it doesn't mean that we want to be in that kind of mode all the time.
So let's get into 3 steps to getting what you want by having an active listening mindset. David, what is the active listening mindset? And let's make sure this is process driven for everyone so it could make sure to show up in their business.
Yeah, active listening mindset. This is a way of thinking about how we bring ourselves to the listening opportunity in a way that gives us the best possible way of creating an outcome for ourselves. That is, we don't just show up in listening and be in listening mode. We think between listening opportunities about how we should kind of show up mentally for that. And there's 3 key elements to the listening mindset that we want everybody to be thinking about. First, meet the speaker where he or she is. That is, understand that how he or she sees the situation is how he or she sees it. That is, what's true for you is true for you. And simply allow that person to be there and start yourself there rather than where you might be on the situation yourself. If it's a conversation you've had many times before, if it's a confrontation you've had many times before, chances are you recognize that the other person has this perspective and you already have a different perspective. But what you need to do is start the conversation from that person's perspective. That's meet them where they are. Don't require them to come over to where you are to start the conversation, because if you're doing that, you're already hijacking the conversation before it started. Second, and this is really hard because our own agenda drives most of our own activities, stay with them there as long as they need you to be there. That is, if they need 5 minutes to talk about whatever the communication is, you need to stay there and be with them there for the time that they need so that they can come out of the situation with what they need out of it. Now, this often runs into a problem for us because we've got our own agenda, right? They may say, I need you to help me solve a problem. And you might say, well, I only have 5 minutes to solve the problem. And so if what rules the conversation there is your need to spend no more than 5 minutes on it, then you're no longer meeting them where they are and staying with them as long as they need you to be there. This is what we talk about with hugs all the time. If you're in a relationship with somebody and you hug each other, sometimes, one person is a longer hugger than the other. And if the other person comes to you and they need a 10-second hug because they've had a bad day or they've had a rough time or something's happened, and they need that companionship from you, and you give them a quick 2-second hug, pat, pat, goodbye, what's that experience like for them? What they're saying is, what you're saying is, I'm willing to extend my care and concern to you for 2 or 3 seconds, but after that, I'm out. I don't need to do that anymore. And this is, of course, what subjective listening is all about. So meeting them where they are and staying there with them is one of the hardest things we can do as human beings. For clients, when we're busy with many others, for staff members, when we're busy with many other things in our lives, and same thing with family and friends. But it's crucial to create that powerful income in the other, to be there as long as they need you to be there. And guess what? The good news is, if you can't be there as long as they need you to be there for that particular moment, you can always say, I can see this is really important for you, and I've got a call come up in 5 minutes. Could we please pick up this conversation at 12:30 when I'll be able to give you my full attention? 99% sure they're going to say, sure, I would love to have you give me your full attention at 12:30. So whenever you feel that you don't have time to listen to somebody else and be there with them for 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever it takes, book another time to do it and bring your full attention at that time. Third piece, get the whole story and get it right. Your mindset going into every communication should be, let me hear the whole story, because if I don't hear the whole story, I'm going to have less than a full set of opportunities to respond, or less ideal responses. And if I don't get the details right, same thing. I probably won't have the ideal response. So as you're asking questions, as you're listening, aim for getting the whole story and getting it right. Chirag, let's talk about how this shows up in people's businesses too.
All right, so your team admin, right? How many people have a team admin here? Just click in the box, and your team admin says that he does not have enough time to complete his tasks every day and is becoming stressed out. We're right in the middle of a busy season. Does anyone really want to hear that from their team admin? David, I would think not. But there's a lot to be said about that statement, as we've learned over the last few sessions. So approaching this conversation, what should they think?
When someone comes to you with some kind of a communication like that, what they're saying is, I'm overwhelmed, I'm struggling, I'm having some kind of a conversation with myself or some kind of an experience that I don't feel capable to deal with on my own. And so when you first hear that kind of communication, your thought process has to be that this person is struggling. It is somebody who may be fearful that they can't get it all done. They may be fearful that they can't get it done to your satisfaction. And what does that mean for their career? Maybe they think that they might get fired or reprimanded or something like that. There's a whole bunch of thoughts that may be in their particular mind and feelings that come along with those that it's probably prompting the communication in the first place. That's about the thinking side. You need to make sure that you're going to give them an opportunity that helps them kind of work through the issues as they particularly see them, not necessarily as you see them. So your approach will be something like recognizing what the other person is feeling and see if you can understand what's kind of like the crux of the issue for them, and see and make sure that they understand that you're willing to be there and help them solve that particular situation. So for example, a typical answer might be something like, I know it's hard, it's not easy, it's hard for all of us, we all just need to find our best way. In that particular response, yes, it's factual and true, but it doesn't necessarily offer anything from your particular side. And remember that this person has come to you because he or she wants or needs something that he or she thinks they can get from you. And so they're not only not getting it, they're also having an experience that either you don't care or that you're not willing to offer it. And that's certainly not the kind of message that you want to send to your own team member. You could suggest something instead. You could say something instead like, you seem overwhelmed by all of this. I totally get that. I'd like to understand better where you're coming from. Tell me about the one or two things that make you feel most stressed. So in this particular response, you're saying, I see how you're feeling here, right? This is the overwhelm. This is a word that's on your feeling vocabulary that we sent you before. I'd like to understand where you are coming from, and I'd like to understand what this looks like from your point of view. That's a kind of like a gift to them. You're saying, I care about how you see this, and I want to understand it better. And you want to say, tell me one or two things about this. I want to invite you into a longer term conversation so that I can get it all and get it right, with the purpose of helping you work your way through this particular challenge.
You guys see how simple that can be? It is easy as 1, 2, 3. Let's talk about an inspired change. How to meet your team members where they are. How to stay engaged with them when you don't want to listen. That's the key one. How to get the whole story and how to get it right. What I want you guys to think about here is how to stay engaged with them when you don't want to listen. A lot of times when a team member says something to us, our immediate thought, feeling is a reaction and judgment. How could they not get all the work done? I don't know what they do all day. And these are the things that go in your head. And based on this, these are the type of responses you show up with. And whether you realize it or not, your tone has a lot to do with it. What's under your iceberg has a lot to do with it. The overwhelm you have when someone says that to you, what you think is more work for me. So what I want you to start thinking about is, how can you meet your team members where they are? How can you learn the skill of staying engaged with them? Like, how are you going to trigger your brain to stay focused on what they're saying and be in active listening mode? And how to get the whole story and how to get it right. Are you able to ask your team members more questions? Are you able to be inquisitive? One of the things to say is everyone has that one person in their life. If you're a parent, I have kids, and if my little girl comes up to me and says, Daddy, 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 I literally stop everything I'm doing. I'm focused in, and that's the only thing that matters, right? I need the whole story, and I want to get it right. What would happen in your life and business if you were that focused when people are coming to you with their concerns, that you really just zoned in on them to get the whole story and you just cared about getting it right? Now, I want you to write down a couple thoughts in your book while you're here and present in that moment. So I'll give you guys a minute, and then we're going to get to the next part, which is David and I's favorite part. All right, so now that you guys have a few things jotted down Think about the first few parts that we went through and ultimately where you are. Think about the opportunities today that you have to practice what it is you learned in this session and how you ultimately could become a better listener. Hey, Felicia, you want to turn your camera on? I'm going to turn my camera on as well for this part, so bear with us here.
Good morning.
Hey, Felicia.
How's everyone?
Doing well. So everyone meet Felicia Lewis. Felicia, tell them, how long you've been in the business and where you work.
I have been in the business for 18 years. I work in San Diego, California. I should say I'm fortunate enough to work in paradise. Um, I'm a Compass agent, and I have a founding agent with Compass. I have been with Compass since the very first 12 days they joined this market. And I love what I do every single day because I love working with people and helping people.
I could say, Felicia, you have been one of the most avid implementers and the stuff that we've done. And I know you've shared a lot of aha moments with us in the chat box, through email with us privately. So first, I just want to acknowledge and just say, thank you for taking the journey and being open to change, right? Changing the way you do things, which has been incredibly successful for the last 18 years, is not easy, is it?
No, it is not, but we have to be willing to change to grow.
Exactly. So look, in terms of doing this, right, before you give us your aha moments, let's go through some live coaching. So guys, everyone on here, every time that we do a session now, we're going to practice the actual skills in conversations with an agent. So if you do want to volunteer to be featured, just send us an email and we'll be happy to reach out to you. So Felicia, you've had some challenges working with your buyer's agent on the team, you shared with me, where you ultimately want them to be more productive.
Yes, I have. I have tried to be of service. I have tried to ask, how can I help you be more organized? And I haven't said it that way. Like what I've asked, what are the things that you think that would be helpful? And then I've asked, and how can I help you with those? And I'm still feeling like a lack of commitment from the agent to put those into place. Now, it's very hard because I have to take my own way of doing things out of, and I'm listening and learning from what you guys are saying, that it's not from my perspective, if I had a challenge or something I wanted to get done, how I would approach it. It's how they approach it or their lack of approaching it. And how do I work with them to motivate them to make this important to them. And so it's a great challenge to me because I want everybody to be self-actualized. I want them to feel good. I want them to enjoy what they're doing. I want them to get the great feelings of helping people. And I know what the steps are they need to take. And when they're not taking them, I feel a failure that I'm not doing a good enough job encouraging them to take those steps.
And then when you feel you have encouraged them and they don't take the steps, then what happens for you?
I get frustrated and I have to keep that to myself, and I have to try to put my feelings aside and just keep, I check in every day. How can I help you? What do you need? Would you like to set up a call? Let's do a meeting. I mean, I feel like I'm constantly in service to my team, as well as constantly in service to my clients and my family and my business. And so it frustrates me a lot because I'm happy to give them the time and devote whatever they need to helping them be successful. But it really frustrates me when they don't grab it and do it. But I know that comes from a deeper place inside them. And I don't have the luxury of time to really examine all of that.
So David, all right. So I'm going to synthesize what you said. I'm going to propose it to David, and we're going to do some live coaching to get you to a solution. Sound fair?
Great.
So where do you go, David, when you're the team leader and you feel that you have given them every different resource tool, you've offered them meetings, you've given them leads, you've given them training, and at some point you want them to be self-actualized, similar to you, right, Felicia?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just not happening that way. What are some different, What's a different way for her to think about it? Ultimately, David, what's a different way for her to approach a conversation? What can she say?
Yeah, so first thing is, it sounds like you've shot a lot of arrows and none of them have yet hit the perfect target.
Correct.
And that's not uncommon. We see it all the time. Of course, it happens to all of us in our lives, one place or another. One approach, which is usually not the successful one, is to just keep banging them over the head until they finally get it through their thick skull that they need to do it the way you're telling them to do it, or they need to find some magic motivation to do it, even though they haven't been motivated to do it up to now. And you said, I want to motivate them. Well, I want to point out to all of us that really it's not about me motivating them. It's really about me tapping into an internal motivation that they have.
Okay.
Because if our mindset goes too far to, I need to motivate them to see the world as I see it, then we're in our own agenda and we're no longer listening to what the world looks like from their point of view. And so what you've told me is you've talked and talked and talked and said and said and said, and you've also asked a lot of questions, which are good questions. Yet you haven't asked the right question to get to the core of the issue for them yet. There's still something inside of them that you don't yet see that is guiding them to not choose to do what you would like them to do. Right? There's something underneath their iceberg that you haven't found yet. If you had found it and you had kind of zeroed in on that point and examined that with them, then chances are they would have either chosen to do it or they walk away.
Well, so I think that it's fear. I think that what I found is fear, which we all experience fear of not doing it well enough, not meeting somebody else's expectations. But the reality is if I can accept and appreciate that they have some fear, and I try to coach them, and I am constantly, any opportunity I have to highlight them, to compliment them, to tell them how proud I am of them. I'm hoping that little by little that chips away at their fear, that they feel a little more confident, a little bit more like they're on the right track. And, I was talking to Chirag, even though we're doing like a culture team building event, I'm going to, present each person with an award to, I'll come up with something about their contribution either to the team or to their business or whatever it is. I'm going to try to dig deep into what I think each person, what would resonate for them. But I don't know how to, that fear is so deep that I don't know how to kind of work them through that.
Got it. So there's two things here. One is, is it the fear of whatever they think the consequences might be, or is it the fear of actually engaging in a real honest and open conversation with you about it? And that's a different kind of fear,
Okay.
right? If they are not in a place where they are comfortable enough to be open and honest and truly authentic with you, then you're only left with your own speculation about what the nature of their fear is. You need to find a way to say something like, I'm getting the feeling that there's something that's really holding you back here, and I really want to understand what it is. And they say, well, it's kind of this or that. And then you've got to listen very carefully to what they say, because you've got to be able to get a little bit deeper than that. You could say something like, I'm getting the sense that what you're really fearful about is X. Could I be off base on that?
Okay.
And for some people, that's a gentle way of getting at giving them permission to share what it is that they're hesitant to share. And you may well be right that what's holding them back is some kind of fear. And my general observation or my general advice to clients is, when you've been beating the same thing over and over again for years and they're not responding, yes, there's something that's going on inside their iceberg that you don't know yet. And probably 80% likely it is something about what they fear.
Hey, David?
Yes.
Now, I'll give you the flip side of this. How do you know when they're just the wrong person? It's time to get rid of them.
Right. That's the other piece to this. So they may well be the wrong person. And ultimately, if the person is not willing to engage in a relationship with you where he or she can get past the fear of having an open, honest conversation, they may not be the right person. And that may just be the signal to you that you need to find somebody else. But you also need to be clear, to be fair to them at the beginning of the relationship, that this is how we do things here. We speak openly and honestly with each other. We share our fears, we share our doubts, we share our successes, we share our confidences. All four of those things are part of like the rules of engagement that some teams have that work so well for them. And if they're willing to sign on to your team under those conditions and then not live up to them, ultimately they may not be the right person for you. But ultimately, as a leader, you need to recognize that just because they're not giving you that doesn't mean that they're the wrong person or that you should let them go. It's always important for you to look at yourself and say, what am I doing that might be creating the inability in this person to share with me what's really going on? If your first reaction is, well, they're no good, I'm going to get rid of them, find somebody else, you might find this pattern of 4, 5, 6 people always having the same problem. And if you see the same pattern in 4 or 5 people, it's not them, it's probably you.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Felicia?
Oh, I totally agree. And that's something that I've had to examine is that, what does my hiring process look like? How am I identifying who and what I'm looking for? Where do they fit with the other people on my team? Is this person going to create a need that's going to take away from my business and from the other people on my team? I mean, the hardest thing is, and I've had to do it several times, the hardest thing is to admit to yourself that you might not have made the right hire that fits your business model, your team. And, we all work very closely and have close relationships and are connected. And it's really hard to say, maybe you would be better served somewhere else, or maybe we can help you find a place where you would be more fulfilled in what you're doing. And that's a really hard thing to do, to constantly be evaluating your team on that level. It's a lot easier to just, I can help this person, I can work with this person, I can get them to come to a reasonable level of production.
When you started your team, was it reasonable when you were hiring someone and you're excited about hiring them, Felicia? Was just finding somebody that had just a reasonable level of production something that made you excited?
No, it's really what makes me excited is being able to help people, to see them grow, to see them develop, to see them being satisfied in what they're doing. And if their production and their knowledge base and all of those things are not growing, if all of the things that I'm working with them are just not firing and not creating a better work time experience for them. This is only a part of their life, right? It's not their whole life. But if what I'm adding is not creating growth and better experience, then somewhere I'm missing. Either I missed in my hire or I'm missing in what I'm providing for them. And it's really frustrating when I constantly feel like I'm serving them and I feel like everybody just is looking to take from me.
I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling, David.
That's a really common situation. The more people you lead, the more you feel like everybody's got a piece of you. Mm-hmm. And what you want is for everyone to want to contribute to you in the way that you want to contribute to them. Correct. If a core element or value of your business is helping people grow and you take great satisfaction from that, that should be the first message that they get from you when you've hired them or even before you hired them. Mm-hmm. And if that's of interest to them and value to them, then they might be a fit for you. If that doesn't matter to them, if they just want to do something else unrelated to that, then maybe they're not a right fit for you in the first place. But if that is a fit for you and they are a fit for you and you bring them on, I hope that you are scheduling time in your business month to have conversations just around that, where it's not about the issue of the day. It's not about this particular client. We're going to sit down and we're going to talk about, what are you learning? What do you want to learn? How can I help you learn that? What can I do to help you learn something different? What's the scary part of learning? Something like that, so that you're booking time to have that kind of a conversation, which is not about the day-to-day stuff. If you do that, you're going to build far more support from them. It's no longer going to be about them taking from you. Hopefully, assuming you hired the right person in the first place. You're actually giving them something completely different that they value and care about. And that's a powerful gift to give them that comes back to you in the form of discretionary effort and motivation.
Okay. Discretionary effort.
So here's a few thoughts that I'll kind of close your loop with, and I think it'll be beneficial for you and everyone else. Yesterday, and I'll share a story with everyone. Yesterday, I did an interview for a potential team member of somebody that I'm coaching. And what I asked this person was, I said, please provide the team member your expectations of them as a team leader, as well as some disappointing things that have disappointed you in the past if they're on a previous team, or what would be disappointing if you joined this team and happened to you? So ultimately up front as a team leader, guys, you'll get all their expectations. You'll know what they expect of you, and you also know what will disappoint you. And that in itself will tell a story. And at the same point, you could share with them, here's my expectation, right, of a team member. And Felicia, that's where you can share some of those learning points and everything else, and that they can understand what your expectations are. And then follow that up by actually having a performance minimum, right? There should be a performance minimum to be part of all of your team and take your time. Remember what your time is worth back to session 1 and session 2. And if you're doing one-on-one meeting with them a week, that's 52 hours a year you're spending with them. There's a value to that. Plus their calls, plus their conversations, plus their problems. So a lot of people have to look at the math equation, Felicia, of what they're going to make versus what their team member could actually, what they can make off of them, and the opportunity cost of the time if they're the wrong hire. So, you know, I urge everyone to do a little more due diligence, understand what's under people's iceberg, set performance minimums, expectations, and disappointments. If you asked Felicia that to each person before you hired them, do you think that would make your experience and theirs different?
Oh, absolutely. My challenge has been when I have set those and then they don't meet those minimums, then it's the hard line of, well, we agreed to these, and so now I have to, and I hate being in that position. And I'm not proud to say that, but I do hate being in that position. It's we agree, and I have had to do that before, and I had to give somebody a time frame, and they weren't able to meet it, and I had to say, okay, let's find a new home for you.
Good job.
Because we're not serving you in the way that you're being as productive as you would like to, because we agreed on these production minimums, right? That they're what you need for your life and supporting your life, and they're what we feel is fair as far as being part of the team, and we're not helping you get there, so let's find you a home that maybe can help you get there.
Exactly. Look, she shared it in the benefit of another person. They're not comfortable conversations to have, but it's necessary. My last thought would be, look, guys, have value for yourself, have value for your business, have value for your knowledge. You now understand the opportunity cost. And look, we'll all keep working on this together, right? The more you can be clear of what someone's expectations and motivations are in joining your team, the easier it'll be for you to connect with them or not connect with them, right? And Felicia, in terms of the hard line on performance, look, if they've showed up to every coaching session, you know they're working hard and they've done what you feel they could do, and they might be a little short. Look, I always say that just give me someone with an open mind and a willingness to work, and you could turn them into something great. It just takes time. So just keep approaching this from a different thought process, and you'll get to where you want sooner than you expect. David?
Yeah, it's always an issue in any business, who should stay and who should go. And you get to call the tune, you're the leader, you get to decide what the standards are, and you're, in a sense, marrying someone to be with you on those particular terms. That doesn't mean that you're a dictator. A marriage is a two-way street. It's a relationship. That's where you come in with your listening. That's where you come in with your caring and compassion and all that support for the other person. Ultimately, you may have to make a couple of choices, but if you're continually seeing people are not working in the way that works for your business, you have to think about what you're doing as a leader or not doing as a leader that might be setting up those conditions of failure.
Got it. So Felicia, thank you so much for being with us here today and being open and sharing with us what goes on in your business. I want to be mindful too of that we have gone a few minutes over, so we'll stick around a few minutes for some Q&A. And look for a recap email. Thank you for everyone who continues to fill out our surveys. As you can see, a lot of the things you've shared with us, we've been able to add on to the sessions in a continued effort to make this better for you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone have a great day. If anyone has a question, stick it in the box. I'm going to stop my screen share. Yes, Edith, the sessions are all recorded. Edith says she wants to share with her husband. Well,
Edith,
According to my, David, according to my standard of success, it's helped her business and helped her life. So this is a win.
You know, Edith, I'm really glad to hear that enthusiasm. When we do these listening programs, and even the longer ones, I mean, this is kind of brief for us here, but the longer ones, everybody wants to go right back and say, I got to give this to my wife. I got to give this to my husband. Got to give it to my kids. And it's true. We all need to be better listeners. Here's a tip for you, Edith. How do you know that you are listening well enough? How do you know that you are listening to create powerful relational impacts on others? They'll tell you, and they'll tell you one of two ways. They'll say, thank you for listening, or you're a good listener. If you hear that feedback, what they're saying to you is, I've had a powerful experience of being heard and attended to by you, whether it's a client, whether it's someone on your team, whether it's someone in your life. So I'm going to challenge every one of you who's still on the call. If you're not hearing from someone in your life, you're a good listener, or thank you for listening. If you're not hearing that at least once every quarter, you're not listening closely enough, period. Think about it.
Thank you, Felicia, again. And reach out, send us an email. The two of us will do just a coaching call with you. And it's just the three of us and not in this large group setting. You're kind enough to volunteer your time and be open with us. So we'd like to contribute something back to you as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
It sounds like you're at a point where we could really give you some good information that might kind of move the needle.
I would love that. I love to learn.
I sent you that communication plan too.
Thank you. I was looking this morning, but I'm gonna search again. Thank you.
I'll put it in a link and I'll put it at the top of your inbox. And I love your shade. So everyone, thank you for being here. Happy Thursday. I guess in this whole COVID world, we sometimes forget what day it is. I have to always think about it. But we appreciate you guys all being open to change and wanting to make an impact on everyone else. So we'll see you guys in the next session. We'll see you in office hours. Bye.
Bye, everybody. See you in office hours.